full debate. Topicality is here, so we actually debate the same thing, which it looks like both teams are going to be doing. We're actually meeting the purpose, the framers' intent, have you, of topicality. With that, let's move down to this value criterion. We're going to accept all the value and criterion arguments, with the exception of consumer choice as the third criterion. Now, basically, I just do want to point out that both sides on this issue really have problems with the status quo and the affirmative team's plan. Basically, they're saying, well, you actually have to give everyone the choice. Number one is this is not true for both. Neither team will be giving someone the choice, and we're going to be looking at that under their counterplan. Let's move down to their counterplan. I have really 4 points, and the first one here is vagueness of the negative team's counterplan. This is under their mechanisms for cross-pollination and their required labeling. Now, they basically first off, they never gave you any kind of standards for what it means to pass the process. We're going to be looking at why that's important in a minute. The second point is they said, well, we've got this mechanism that works wonders to prevent cross-pollination, but when my partner asked about it, he could not list it off. He could not tell you what the mechanism was. This is completely vague by the negative team, and you really do not know what their point is good or what their plan is going to be doing. My second argument under the counterplan is that it drops the whole second justification. It's not going to solve at all for food production or the $12 billion based on product recalls, farm subsidies, et cetera, et cetera. They're not going to be solving for that at all. Just please note that that's going to be flowing to the affirmative team side and not to the negative side. And actually, the first justification won't be either. As we look at in point 3, is cross-pollination. Now, they basically said, well, cross-pollination is not inevitable. Actually, you can resist it. That is absolutely not the case. And their only argument here was, look at their evidence. It doesn't say what they thought it said. Let's look at some more evidence from the Drake Journal of Agricultural Law in 2008, saying it is important to note that it is impossible for farmers to grow entirely pure crop. While certain methods can limit the amount of contamination by genetically modified crops, it cannot be eliminated altogether. An absolute zero threshold cannot be achieved of either genetically modified or conventional crops. For this reason, industry standards for purity of crops ranges from 98% to 99.5%. 2 things to realize from this evidence. Number 1, it is impossible to end all cross-pollination. Impossible. Number 2 is they talk about some kind of standards that have worked. What this evidence says is there have been some standards that have tried, and basically it's mitigated it a little bit, but has not stopped cross-pollination. This is exactly why the vagueness of the negative team's plan is absolutely essential to this round, because unless they're proposing some kind of new technology that never's been tried anywhere, point A of our first justification about unavoidable can be solved by the affirmative team, but not by the negative team. There's more evidence on this if you want to look into it about the issue of cross-pollination. We'd be glad to bring that up. But the next issue is about standards. Now, the basic point here is, well, we're going to be enacting these wonderful standards that have been proven to work, and it's really going to save us from GM crops. The negative team's point is those standards do not exist. There have never been standards that can actually catch GM food. And we're going to look at some more evidence under this. We talked about L-tryptophan in the first speech, talking about how it is dangerous, and they basically accepted it. L-tryptophan could be passed today under current standards. Jeffrey M. Smith, the founding director for the Institute of Responsible Technology, said in 2003, if introduced for the first time, the contaminated L-tryptophan could pass easily through the current FDA regulations. End quote. So what it says here is we could pass it through. Now, why is that important? Why does that apply to their counterplan? Because the current FDA regulations include the screening that the negative team would be proposing. The next point here is that there is no risk assessment at all that can actually find harmful products in genetically modified organisms. The Independent Science Panel said in 2003 that GMOs are unnatural, not just because they can be produced in the laboratory, but because many of them can only be made in the laboratory. Thus, it is possible to introduce new genes and gene products, many from bacteria, viruses, and other species, or even genes made entirely in the laboratory into crops, including food crops. The artificial constructs are introduced into cells, and it goes on to say, the problem is compounded by the overwhelming instability of transgenic lines, which makes risk assessment virtually impossible. It is impossible to find the problems in the negative team's counterplan, while the affirmative team's plan will actually solve for it. Thank you. I'm now ready for questions.
Let's start with the last piece of evidence that you read.
Sure.
Can you tell me, did it or did it not specifically say transgenic, genetically modified food?
Yes, that's what.
Is that the only type of genetically modified food?
No.
What are the other types?
Yes, I believe. Transgenic is when you take genes from one crop and put them into another crop. So that is, by definition, what genetically modified is.
Okay. You know what, I'm going to move on from that then. Let's talk about pharmaceuticals and standards.
Sure.
Do pharmaceuticals have standards for every new conceivable drug that could ever be invented?
I'm not aware of whether they tested or not.
Should we ban drugs because sometimes they have killed people?
If we're putting the drugs into the system and we can't tell whether one's going to kill someone or one's not going to kill someone, then yes, we should stop drugs from going into the system because we're basically playing genetic roulette with all of our people. Some are going to die, some won't. We really don't know which ones will do it.
I see. Okay, so we should ban things that might kill us.
If we have no way of telling if they're going to kill us or not, and if they have historically killed us, then we definitely do need to take a look.
Okay, let's talk about airplanes for a second. The Wright brothers, when they first invented a working airplane, would it be a fair criticism to make at that time that there's no way this is efficiently going to transport hundreds of people?
To efficiently transport?
Hundreds of people.
Sure, back when they made their two-person airplane.
When they made the combustion engine, weren't there skeptics who said that there's no way this will ever go faster than the horse and buggy?
Sure.
And there were people who also claimed it was unsafe, weren't there?
Yes, some people claim it was
Do you
unsafe.
think that the people who pioneered those two technologies should not have done so for those reasons?
Well, here's basically the big difference between the two. Is when you actually
We
look
can
at
argue about the differences later. I just want to know, in those examples, should they have not pursued those risky technologies?
Oh, they should have, because they had reasons
So
to actually...
history unfolded...
Can I explain my answer?
No, actually no. I know you want to talk about biotech, so let's move up to that.
I wasn't going to talk about
Your L-tryptophan example. First of all, isn't it true that you can still buy L-tryptophan?
You can buy the non-GM version, yes.
Isn't it true that in the example where 37 people died, it was not due to GMOs, but due to the filtering process?
It was due to GM and the fact that the filtering process could not catch it. It's dual-fold.
Oh, okay. So it was actually the filtering process, though.
I said it was dual-fold. Basically, it was a GM product that had a lot of issues and killed a lot of people, but no, we did
Has
not
anyone
catch
died because of GM since 1980?
We didn't provide any examples, but there were plenty of health risks, and health actually increased percentages of
Okay, so
cancer.
let's talk about efficiency real quick. You accepted all of our counter criteria. Can you find for me where efficiency is outlined within those?
You didn't talk about efficiency.
You're right. Okay, so your second justification, how does that really fit into the framework of the purpose of government, the precautionary principle, and consumer choice?
Well,
Or does it at all?
It is a benefit to the affirmative team that will outweigh the negative.
It will
team's
outweigh the
benefit.
criteria that you accepted.
Yes, basically, if
Okay.
there's no advantages, we'll look at the second justification.
Thank you. We'll take that.
You have comments, Captain Left. Left. Minutes left.